Good afternoon, folks. We're going to get started. Um, this is our last webinar of the 2025-2026 webinar series, but we do have one more coming in June, which I'll highlight at the end. Typically, these are Thursdays, but this one was moved to Tuesdays, so that I'm mindful that a few people might be joining a bit late or that they'll be waiting for the recording as well. So just going to go through my generic stuff here. So I'm Brandon Searle. I'll be moderating the webinar again. Just quick webinar overview. So we're going to welcome everyone, intro to the Research Center, as well as Building Transformations. Building Transformations has partnered with us to deliver this webinar series. And an intro to Maxime Pelletier, Director of Public Affairs at UTILE. Maxime will then do a presentation on their project they've done in Quebec. We'll then have a moderated Q&A and discussion. I encourage you, there's a Q&A feature at the top of the or maybe for folks, for attendees, it might be at the bottom. But anyways, submit your questions through the Q&A feature, and we'll be sure to address those. We do have to wrap up about 5 or 10 minutes earlier than normal. So if we don't get to some questions, we can always collect those and share them with Maxime and see if he has time to answer them. As usual, submit your questions at any time using the Q&A feature. If you have difficulty hearing, check out your audio settings. If there's any other problems, just let us know in the Q&A feature and we'll be on it. And just a reminder that all sessions are being recorded. They're available on our website and on the Building Transformations YouTube page. A little bit about UNB. So the Research Centers at UNB. So UNB pictured here is the Fredericton campus, and UNB was founded in 1785. It's the oldest speaking English school in the country. It's home to Canada's first engineering, forestry, and computer science programs, with engineering courses first being taught in 1854. UNB now has 2 campuses, several research centers and institutes, with the OCRC being one of them. And we were named the most entrepreneurial university by Startups Canada when it was last awarded. I guess that's been a decade now, but a decade ago. A little about the OCRC. So it's our strategic plan. We're focused on industry relevance, collaboration, excellence, and integrity. And our core research areas is focused on process and productivity improvement, the implementation of digital technology, structures and building enclosure testing, then benchmarking and innovation in construction. So kind of those industry-wide research, and what Maxime is presenting today is really really falls in that final bucket around case studies and things. I wanted to quickly pitch our conference coming up in August. This one's in England at Northumbria University. Northumbria University, specifically the IC3, so that's a construction research center in the UK. They helped us deliver our conference in 2024 in Fredericton, and we're returning the favor by helping them deliver a conference in the UK in 2026. So just mark your calendars there, and the agenda is starting to really fill out. You can check that out on the website as well. And there's a little bit about Building Transformations. So again, they're a not-for-profit organization, member-driven, and they focus on doing missions. They have think tanks, they have awards show, publications, and kind of creating a network within the folks who build our infrastructure across the country. Building Transformations has over 1,800 members. You can see some stats there. It's predominantly private sector. And here's our board of directors. So it really varies both across Canada and the US. You can see a large group there, and that's currently expanding. If you're interested in a membership, you can check out their website. If your corporation has a membership, you get a free one, so check that out. Or there's individual memberships as well. The 10th edition of the Innovation Spotlight is also available now online. I have the hard copy here. You can see the OCRC was actually featured in this one. We won the Best in Innovation Award last year, so you can check that out. There's a lot of modern methods of construction or prefab through that. And then a couple things. So their next two in-person events are happening in Halifax, August 11th to 13th. So we're really starting to fill out that agenda now, and I encourage you to check that out. And then in Toronto, November 4th and 5th. And then just highlighting Building Transformation's mission partners. Finally, I want to thank our partners at the OCRC. So our founding partner is Osco Construction Group, and then some support from the Government of Canada for the webinar series through ACOA. And finally, our marketing partners. There's a variety of them there. So with that, I'm going to welcome Maxime to turn on his microphone and video. And Maxime's going to be presenting on driving modular construction costs down, a case study. I first saw this in February, where Maxime presented as part of a webinar series that we were doing for the Canadian Housing Renewal Association. So for folks who attended that, there might be some duplication, maybe not. I'm not sure if you've updated it, Maxime, but I'll hand it off to you now and look forward to your presentation. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Brendan, for the introduction. Let me just share my presentation. All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad to be with you to talk about UTILE's work with volumetric modular construction. Just a few more words about myself that can be helpful for you today. I am a political scientist by trade. And I don't know which way you're supposed to hold the hammer. So please, if you have highly technical questions, please feel free to write them down, but maybe I won't have the answer to them. So on the screen right now, you have my email address. So in case there are any questions that I'm unable to answer today because they're too technical, please feel free to email them at the address that you see right now. And I'll ask my more technologically gifted colleagues to provide you with an adequate answer. So I've been in the affordable housing sector for about 4 years now, working at UTILE. And so today, what I will be doing is quite simple. I will very briefly present UTILE so you have a vague sense of what we are as an organization. And then I will present a case study of a volumetric modular project that we did last year that we delivered in 2025. And then I'm going to talk briefly about what we think are the policy and systemic implications of what we found out in our case study. The presentation should last about 20 to 30 minutes, so there should be plenty of time for question afterwards. So about UTILE, we are a social economy enterprise, which is a term that we use in Quebec to describe nonprofit organization whose income is derived mostly from economic activities. So in our case, we develop and we operate nonprofit student housing. So our revenues come from either development fees that we pay ourselves when we develop a new project or the revenue of the apartments that we rent. Our goal is to create a high volume of nonprofit housing in order to not only help students that live in our buildings, but also try and have a systemic impact by basically flooding the market with affordable nonprofit housing. You can see on the map here that we're active across Quebec in all major university cities. At the moment, we have 920 units that are rented, so we house about 1,200 students. Our first building was delivered only in 2020. So between 2020 and now, we managed to build roughly 1,000 units. And we have another 760 that are under construction as we speak. So we have entered a new phase of our development where we try to deliver, as I said earlier, 600 to 800 units each year. So far, we've managed to keep that rhythm with what we broke ground on in 2025, and we're on course to repeat it this year. And hopefully this will be our cruising speed for the upcoming years. At UTILE, we've always thought that we as a nonprofit, have the duty to try and improve the construction sector and maybe sometimes take risks that the private sector, for different reasons, cannot take. And since we began doing student housing, for some reasons, people kept telling us you should do modular housing. It's perfect for student housing. I don't know why people picture students living in containers, I think, in Rotterdam, and they think we should do it. And so for many years, we looked at it, I want to say superficially, and it never seems to make economic sense to go with volumetric modular construction up until there was a funding opportunity at CMHC. And then we thought, okay, let's have a better look at what modular construction could do for us. And if you listen to Mark Carney during the last federal election, you will have heard interesting things about modular construction. Mr. Carney said that it was 50% faster, which is true. We heard that modular construction has better quality than traditional construction. We heard that it's cheaper than traditional construction. And we heard that it's greener than traditional construction, which is all very surprising. Well, it was all very surprising to us because if that was the case, then modular construction wouldn't have 5% of market shares. It would have 99% of market share. So we thought, no, there's something fishy about the promises of modular construction, and we thought we need to look deeper into the details of why it's not working the way it's supposed to work. Because theoretically, you're building in a controlled environment and you have industrialization and standardization, so it should be efficient and potentially more efficient than traditional construction, but it doesn't seem to be the case on the market. So what's going on? And so we had an opportunity to get funding from CMHC through the Housing Supply Challenge level 5, which was called Scaling Up. What we submitted as a project was we started talking to some actors in the industry, and what these told us is we have no recurrent clients. And most of the housing projects that we do, the multi-residential housing projects that we do, they are projects that were first designed to be built using traditional construction. And then somewhere along the way, maybe because funding was contingent on it, it was transformed into modular construction, which is not the optimal way of designing a modular project. And at the end of the day, the project ended up being riddled with mistakes. It costed more than using traditional construction. And so the clients said, oh, well, we're never going to use modular construction again. And so everything that was learned in the process was never applied to build a second, third, or fourth project using modular construction and hopefully improve upon the first one. And so we thought, okay, as a developer, we can commit to develop multiple projects using modular construction. And so we went out looking for actors that were interested in developing a consortium with us. And so we work with a manufacturer, which is Industrie Bonneville, one of the largest prefab manufacturing in the country. And we also had a general contractor. We had architects and engineers. And we sat together from the onset of the project, and we said together we will develop a multi-residential volumetric modular project, and we will do multiple projects in a sequence so that each time we'll try to be more efficient than the first one. And CMHC thought that this was an adequate answer to the challenges of modular housing, and so we got funding from this, which allowed us to take risks that we wouldn't otherwise take when developing a affordable housing project. To put it simply, our estimation was that using volumetric modular construction would cost about 10% more than using traditional construction. And of course, when affordability is your goal, then you cannot afford to have a cost increase of 10%. And so thanks to this funding, we were able to move ahead with this project nevertheless. So a few words on the project itself. You can see a picture of it as it was finalized. It was built in Rimouski, which is one of the smallest university town in Quebec. We built 150 units in 10 or 11 months once the contamination on the site was done. It's a 4 stories project. It's mostly studios, but there are also 2-bedroom apartments in there. It was built using 96 modules, and there are 62 of them that are identical, so that we were able to have a high degree of standardization because basically 2/3 of the modules were exactly the same. The total costs of the project was roughly slightly above $30 million. And in terms of funding, we got a grant from the Quebec-Canada Agreement on Housing and just a mortgage loan, and the land was given by the municipality. And one question that we often get when we talk about using modular construction is how difficult was it to comply with municipal bylaws with a modular project? And it's sort of surprising question for us because the answer is not at all. We didn't need to get any exemption for this project because it was using modular construction. So maybe it's a different story in other provinces, but in Quebec, the municipal bylaws were never an issue for us. So in terms of timeline, so we got the funding from CMHC in the spring of 2024. The parcel of land was transferred to us in May from the city of Rimouski. The confirmation of funding came in August, and in mid-October, we started both the construction work on the site and the production of modules at the factory. And in August 2025, so roughly 10 or 11 months later, our tenants were moving in for the beginning of the school year. So we were indeed capable of doing this project in a record time using modular construction. For us, it's a big deal because when you do nonprofit housing for the general public, it doesn't matter that much when you deliver it because people will move in at any time. But when you're doing student housing, you cannot deliver a project in November or February. It makes no sense. And therefore, being able to meet the August-September deadline was a big deal for us. So in terms of R&D, what makes this presentation possible was that we work with open book with our business partners, which was an interesting process because we are a nonprofit, but all of our partners are private companies. So sometimes there was some convincing and some pedagogy that was needed to make them understand why we needed to work that way. We also paid a consulting firm, MNP, to measure precisely the breakdown of the cost of the project. So what was being done on site, what was being done on factory, how many hours of labor were put on site on the windows, how many hours of labor were put in the factories on the windows. So we get a really interesting breakdown of the costs. And our goal with that was to evaluate where further gains could be obtained. And on site, we had a full-time staff that was paid by the general contractor to document all the challenges that they faced for using modular construction and the solutions that they found so that future projects can learn from those. So what happened? Overall, construction time was reduced by 50%. So this is, I want to say, common knowledge. This allowed us to have tenants move in basically one school year faster than if we had used traditional construction. When we began that project, the occupancy rate in Rimouski was 99.7%. And so being able to answer the needs of students that quickly was very important for us and for people who live in our building today. We were able to increase the productivity in the factory by about 40%. So that means that instead of taking about 4 hours per module, each module's, well, no, let me rephrase that. In the factory, there are 16 stations. And so modules start at station 1, and usually every 4 hours, they move the modules to the next station. While building our project, when they were doing the 62 identical modules, they were able to have the modules move from one station to the other at every 2 hours and a half, 2 hours, 45 minutes. So it was about 40% increased production in the factory, which is a big deal because the labor cost is fixed. So if you're 40% more productive, then you can reduce the costs of labor. And so overall, the reduction in labor costs from standardizations, that means compare with the factory producing, let's say, single family home, was about 30%. So on many of the aspects that we often hear about what makes modular construction attracting and efficient, yes, construction time was reduced. Yes, with standardization, we were able to improve productivity in the factory, and that reduced the cost of labor by a significant amount. Yet, the overall project costs were not cheaper than traditional construction, and I want to say it wasn't even close. There was a significant increase in how much the project costs because we use volumetric construction. And so why is that so? Well, the first thing that's important to mention is that 57% of the direct costs of the project were still incurred on site. So even though we're talking about volumetric modular construction, we really should be talking about sort of hybrid construction because we're still highly dependent on on-site construction for even a volumetric modular project. But what we noticed was that, yes, if we look at the direct costs of mechanical system, electrical work, interior finishes, doors, and windows, if we compare the cost of doing it at the factory versus what we estimate would have cost us if we did it on site, there was a reduction of 9 to 24%. So mechanical systems and electrical work were the two items where the savings were the largest, with 24 and 23% respectively. And overall, the direct costs for the whole project were about 7% smaller than if we had used traditional construction. So that's a win. Working in a factory really is cheaper and more effective in some regard than working on site. However, you have to add to this the costs of packaging the modules and then shipping them. In our case, the factory is situated in Belleuil on the south shore of Montreal, and it's about 600 kilometers away from Rimouski, so it wasn't close. And so the costs of packaging and shipping, they're basically the same amount of the savings that we got in direct costs from working with modular construction. So it evens out, right? So you get some efficiency gains because you're working in a factory, but those efficiency gains are canceled by the cost of packaging and shipping and assembling the modules, which by itself would be fine because if it were just of these 2 points, you would still get a building built in half the time for the same price as traditional construction. However, when you factor in indirect costs, this is where modular construction became more expensive than the traditional alternative because you have to pay for all the direct costs of maintaining the factory. So the factory pays taxes to the municipality. There's an administrative cost. Workers are there all year long, even though the factory isn't producing anything for a specific week, so they have to manage their workforce accordingly, and this has a cost. So when you add the indirect costs to the price of the modules, then traditional construction became more expensive. Modular construction became more expensive than the traditional option. About 20% of the costs of our modules were the indirect costs associated with the factory. And that has very interesting implications for how we can make modular construction more efficient, because you can lower this cost simply by producing more in the same factory during any given year. So what can we learn from our experience in Rimouski? The most important point is that the cost structure of manufacturers is radically different than the cost structure of general contractors. General contractors, I like to joke, it's 5 people in a tent, right? They have very low fixed costs. It's mostly just wages that they have to pay, whereas a manufacturer has very high investments. There's capital that's immobilized in the factory. And so when you have an industry with a high level of capital investment, like the modular manufacturers, you can have either two strategies. You can have a very high volume of production with low margins, or you can have a low volume of production with higher margins. And traditionally, the Canadian modular industry has used the latter approach. So instead of creating large multi-residential buildings that would be highly standardized and reproduced, they went completely the other way. They specialized in single family homes that were very high quality, or they were marketed as being very high quality, and you can customize every aspect of it, which is the exact opposite of standardization. And so if we want to bring the cost of modular construction down, what we have to do is to shift the industry's business model away from this high quality, highly personalized single family home, and bring them into a high volume with lower margins of highly standardized apartments, essentially. And this isn't something that's easy to do. And one thing that we noticed while doing an international review of the literature was that when attempting to make this move in other countries, many companies went bankrupt because they invested in their factories so they could have a higher output, but the demand wasn't there, and they ended up having a overinvestment in a factory that didn't produce enough for the business model to work. So we're kind of stuck there today, where we could technically invest more to have better production, better efficiency at the factories, more robotization. But if the demand isn't there on the other side, then these companies will just go bankrupt. So it is prudent for them to not make this switch at the moment. So in terms of what we can do to bring the direct costs down, well, the larger your project, the more standardization you can have. So instead of doing 150 units, if we had done 300 units, then we could have had 120 modules that were identical. And so it would have been even more efficient in the factory to make this project. So the larger the projects, the better it is for modular construction, simply because the economies of scale are better. And it takes time for people inside the factory to figure out, okay, where's my bottleneck? What can I do to solve this? And then, okay, we've gained, instead of taking 3 hours per station, we now need 2 hours and 40 minutes. So what's the next bottleneck, and how do we solve it? So if you're building a project with 18 modules, you don't have the necessary time to solve these issues, and you don't get really any economies of scale. There's also an issue with um, urban planning, I want to say, where of course nobody wants to say, well, we'll just design one building and regardless of where this is built, it will be exactly the same because the architectural integration will not be great. Maybe the size of the units will not be adapted to the needs of local population. And so there's a lot of pushback on the idea that we could have just this one building and we would just copy paste it and build it in different places to reduce the costs of construction. But then on the other side, there's a trade-off with how well it will be adapted to its environment. And we see this as one of the major political roadblock towards unlocking the potential of modular construction. We could also increase the proportion of work done in factories. So as I said earlier, in our project, we calculated about 43% of costs were incurred in a factory. In Sweden, they're at 52%. So if it's cheaper to work in a factory, and if we increase the proportion of work done in the factory, then we have some savings. And as I said, there were multiple failures elsewhere in the world of overinvestment in the manufacturers without demand to accompany it, and that was disastrous for many companies. And that's the first thing we heard again when during the electoral campaign at the federal level, when the Liberals said, we will invest, I can't remember the amount, but it was huge, like 2 billion into the production capacities of factories, then our reaction was, oh, but will demand follow? Because if demand doesn't follow, then that will be in vain. So can we bring indirect costs down as well? Well, that's the simple part. As I said earlier, if we increase the annual output of manufacturers, then you spread the fixed costs on more units. So the fixed cost of every unit is lower. So instead of having 20% of the cost of the modules, that is the indirect costs of the factory, then if we double output, then we reduce that to 10%. So there's definitely a gain to be had there. However, what we noticed is that even us as a developer who said, okay, that's the issue, customers don't repeat business with manufacturers, so we will do that. We will repeat business with manufacturers. The manufacturers, they need to plan their production, right? So general contractors, you can easily demobilize them. If you have an issue with finance, you call them, you say, we wanted to start in June, but we'll start in July instead. They say, okay, and they call the people and they mobilize 1 month later. But a factory doesn't work like that. If we cannot build our project in June as we planned and we try to move it to July, well, maybe the factory is busy with another project. And so the factory loses one client, basically, and there's nothing going on during the month of June. So they have to, put their workers on employment insurance. Yeah. So in order to maximize the output of manufacturers throughout the year, developers like us need to be able to give them predictability. And we, as a developer of nonprofit housing, have no predictability on our funding. That's an issue that's always discussed in our circles. And therefore, even with our willingness to give our manufacturer predictability, we realized that we were not able to do it. So if we're serious about developing the modular construction industry, then we need to give developers who have modular projects long-term predictability on their funding, so they can pass on that predictability to the manufacturers. They will be able to maximize the output of their factory throughout the year, and that will reduce the indirect costs of every single module. And finally, a few words about finance. I know this may not be your cup of tea, but there's a problem with financing modular construction, whereas traditionally governments will only disperse the grants or the banks will only disperse the loans as construction progress, and they sort of there's something to back up their loan. So when you're doing modular construction, there's 50% of the work and the cost is incurred on site before any work is done. It is incurred in the factory before any work is done on site. So the banks need to loan you money that isn't backed by a mortgage, and they see it as too risky and they don't want to do it. So there's a huge problem with how you finance the first part of the production of the modules in a factory. When you find a borrower that will give you that loan, then the interest rates are extremely high because they see it as more risky. And if the interest rates are higher, then the financial costs of the project goes up, and that ultimately makes it less affordable for the people who live in there. So these are, we think, the most important points. So if I summarize them, in terms of direct costs, we can increase robotization. We can try to move as many part of the work in the factory rather than doing them on site. However, we must be careful not to overinvest without adequate demand. If we want to drive down indirect costs, we need predictability of funding so we can maximize the work schedule of the factory across the year, and we need to find a way to finance the deposit that we give to the manufacturers 6 months before our work begins on site. And if we do all that, then we still think that it's possible for modular construction to be at least on par with traditional construction in terms of costs. But at the moment, unfortunately, our experience is that it is not the case. So on that, I will stop talking and I will let you ask questions.
Perfect. Thank you, Maxime, for that. I'm gonna go 1 sec here to my slide deck and just put up a placeholder. So, actually, I won't bother with that, but like Maxime mentioned, you can submit your questions at any time using the Q&A feature there. So Maxime, I do have quite a few questions. One thing, so our webinar series, it would have been October 2024. We had some colleagues from the UK present, and they were tracking different KPIs of a traditional versus the modern methods of construction. I think it was a precast concrete build. And so they weren't only tracking speed and cost necessarily, they were tracking a few other factors. I was curious, like, did you guys track quality for your KPIs? Did you track anything related to safety for the trades or anything like that? Or was that kind of outside the scope of the case study?
It was outside of the case study per se. I did ask my colleagues what they thought of the quality, and the answer I got was that it was similar to what we would have with traditional construction. So there were some hiccups, but it was at the same level of what we usually experience using traditional construction. We feel like some of them would be resolved if we manage to do a second project using the same partners, because there is a lack of expertise with modular construction, especially when Rimouski is sort of a smaller town, and so the pool of contractors that we had access to was limited, so we couldn't choose those who had already worked with modular construction. And one interesting thing that I didn't mention was that part of what we think drive the cost of modular construction up is that contractors don't really know the scope of work when we ask them to submit a price. And therefore, it's part of our learning process that now we have a better idea of what the work that contractors did, how long it took for them to do it in Rimouski. So if and when we do a second project, we think we'll be able to get better prices out of the contractors that we work with.
Yeah, yeah, because that was one thing, like you said, 43% of the total cost was factory and 57% on site, yet probably 85 to 90% completion. Well, maybe a bit less in the multifamily. Let's say it's 80% is probably done in the factory versus the site. And I was going to get into, well, one is I've talked to some electrical contractors here, for example, and they're like, the first modular one and some of my colleagues on this call have heard me say this, but the first modular project that they quoted, they assumed a crew would have to be there for 6 weeks because that's what it would be for like a traditional duplex or triplex. And then they get there and it only takes a crew 2 weeks. And then at the same time, they have 5 crews and every foreman's asking for a person from the other crew because they're all short people. So, I think as the supply chain matures, they'll be able to estimate their costs better,
Yeah.
and it probably wouldn't be uh, noticed as much. The other comparison, and folks, if you do have a question, we just asked if you submit in the Q&A, said that way it can be documented for the recording and for the our blogs and stuff afterwards, please. But yeah, so my next question was just on the cost. So when you were comparing modular costs, like we've been asked to do quite a few case studies, and it is difficult because no one project is the same necessarily, whether it's within, even if you had the same companies doing it, the same design, they're side by side, which was the case in the UK. You have different superintendents, different foremen, different trades, so on and so forth. But when you were comparing costs, was it a traditional costs like post occupancy where you captured all the change orders and everything in traditional versus the after project for modular, um, or like how did you ensure as much apples to apples in the cost comparison?
Um, we simply compared it with the estimates that we had
Okay.
with the traditional construction, and our consulting firm who has experience with it helped us with that a little
Yeah.
bit. But we don't have it's not like a perfect net
Yeah.
experiment setup. We
Yeah.
must
No.
admit.
Yeah. No. It's all good. It's good. I just wanted to ask because yeah, like there's been case studies where the on-site work still sees like a 10x cost overrun compared to the factory work. So we there's just more RFIs and things that or change orders that come throughout a project. It seems on a job site, but yeah, there's definitely pros and cons to both. One thing, so just thinking, yeah. So my next question was going back to your general con or the contractors. Did they have modular experience working? Like Bonneville's pretty large, so yeah.
But the manufacturer obviously has
Yeah,
experience.
yeah.
They're the ones responsible for assembling the modules on site, but
Okay.
then the general contractor essentially takes over, and they did not have
Fit out.
significant experience with modular construction. They did, however, have a willingness to develop that expertise and to invest into they had the mentality that this project would require more resources on their part than a regular project, but it would pay off in the expertise that would be gained through the project. And
Yeah.
one thing that we are discussing with the manufacturer is that we think they should work more closely with general contractors, and they should provide sort of a uh, all-included package where we have one contract with them and they have a contract with the general contractor that hopefully they work with on a frequent basis so that they would more closely collaborate together. We think this would make the more sense. Yeah, we think this would make the more sense for the industry.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I was gonna ask. I'll get to the questions in here first. I was gonna ask what type of contract or procurement method was used because, yeah, like you said, like a modified design build or some type of collaborative design build where you have your GC and manufacturer working as almost one. And was the prime? I don't know if you can share this, but was the prime contract direct to the manufacturer and then they were responsible for hiring site trades and everything, or was it a local contractor in Rimouski who then hired the manufacturer as a sub?
We have two separate contracts, which
Okay.
we think isn't one with the manufacturer and one with
Oh,
general
oh.
contractor. Where yeah, and this is why we
Lesson learned, maybe.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a local contractor, which added challenges to the whole process because the general contractor they're based in a town that's hundreds of kilometers away from Rimouski as well. But we
Uh,
didn't find a general contractor that was experienced enough and large enough, essentially, for a project of this size. And just to put things in perspective, Rimouski is a 50,000
yeah.
people regional capital. And so 155 units is a very large project for such a city.
Yeah. 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 No. Yeah, I've been to Rimouski a couple times. It's not much, or it'd be not much smaller than Fredericton, I guess. So I'm gonna go to the questions here. I think, Emmanuel, I think your question I might be able to answer, but Bonneville is one of the largest manufacturers in Quebec, Emmanuel. So I'd assume they are CSA A277 certified, Maxim? And is that a require? So yeah, I'm
I don't know.
I'll go out on a limb and say they are like Bonneville and I always get them mixed up. RCM or RCS are two of the larger. There's a few other ones in Quebec that are quite large modular. So and then on the quality side, it's interesting. We can talk about that offline, Emmanuel, sometime because there's some stuff that we're seeing, and I think it is around um, site storage, laydown area, related issues that are leading to quality issues, and then obviously the fit out and the expertise on site are things that we're seeing. Going to Ali here, and Maxime, get your thoughts. I have a thought too, but Ali's asking, is there a hybrid option where on-site construction could do foundations, maybe first level, then off-site could be built for two and up? Does it have to be all or nothing? Can't we find an optimal formula? Is that something I guess UTILE has been exploring?
Can you repeat the
Sorry, I read
question?
that quick. Yeah, so the question is from Ali, and it says, is there a hybrid option where, say, like like your foundation and first floor are traditional
Hmm.
construction, and then above that, and before you answer that, Maxim, Nicole, who's on the call, her master's was doing a case study where it was a hotel in New Brunswick, and all the civil work and first floor was done traditionally, and the second, third, and fourth floors were done modular 200 kilometers up the road. That obviously crunched the schedule and things. So it has been done for commercial, but I guess Maxime, is that something UTIL is exploring?
No, and I think that would go against the objective of increasing economies of scale and standardization in the sense that our first floor is made up of the same modules than the floors above. And so
Mm.
in a specific case of purely residential project, I don't think it would make a lot of sense, though we did have a bit of traditional construction for the sort of central part of the building. So I don't know if you remember the pictures, but the central part of the building where the entrance is and the office of our building manager is there as well. It was built using traditional construction, and basically we have two identical wings attached to it. So we sort of did it in as a very small fraction of the project.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. I think the case of this hotel was the first floor had like I Nicole could confirm, but it had like it had a restaurant, like a commercial kitchen, laundry, variety of other um, custom things that would make it make sense to be built on site. But you're right in terms of the economies of scale. Um, Next question is from Steven, and I think Maxime, some of your literature might have been looking at because you made reference to some quote unquote failures of modular companies. Steven's based in the UK. He's worked for
Yep.
many modular companies in the UK. He's probably been in the industry for 40 years, so he would probably be able to give you some more background on stuff that the literature isn't allowed to share. But Steven said, did you contract your modular contract through your GC or to them directly? I think you did direct to the GC and direct to the manufacturer.
Yeah, I think I was wrong earlier. What I should have said is we had a tripartite, is that how you would say it? Agreement.
Tri-party. Yep.
Yeah, so we had a tripartite agreement with both of them, which required a lot of negotiations, and this is why we now suggest to our manufacturer that they have their own general contractor, and so we can just They can just give us one price that would include both on and off-site costs. Because in the end, so maybe to give you a bit of perspective, what we're in the middle of right now is we're talking with the same partners about doing a second project. And what we did, we said, okay, we want it to be no more than this much more expensive than traditional construction, make it work. And so every time that we want to increase costs, like payment to the manufacturer, we have to reduce the payment to the general contractors. There's sort of this dynamic going on, and this negotiation is complicated, and we think it would make sense for the manufacturer not to fully integrate and become itself a general contractor, because this was also a source of bankruptcy elsewhere in the world in the past, but to at least have some sort of partnership with a general contractor where through repeat business they sort of iron out these issues, and as a developer you only have to negotiate with one entity, in that case, the manufacturer.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, one thing I'll mention too, just because we've done a bit of research in this area, and I know, I mean, there's some folks on this call. I know I won't point them out, but I know they've have experience where they've been, the manufacturer in the prime and then hiring as subcontractors, or they've been, the subcontractor to a general on commercial or residential projects. And it seems like there's no perfect way. It's probably really about like the relationships they have collaborating together. I think in prefab in general, where you see the most successful prefab companies is where their parent company is a like for-profit developer and a general contractor. Like Landmark Homes as an example, or there's a large company in Ontario that Mattamy, who's announced that they're building their factory. So that's some examples. But what ones that have come up recently that seem to be doing well, and I'd be curious to know if you've explored this route, is where you've hired a construction manager or a consultant type person who has expertise in modular, and then they have relationships with manufacturers or local trades in different parts of the country. So we're seeing it in different parts of the Maritimes where it's a consultant out of the West and working, they identify some local trade companies because they don't carry trades themselves, but then they have strategic partnerships with different factories, and then you procure to design build team, which includes your CM, your design team, your manufacturer, and your GCs. Is that something you've explored?
It's not something we've done. We sort of wanted to develop our own expertise as well, but I've learned about it in the same seminar that you referenced to earlier, where we've met, but it's not something that we've worked with yet.
Yeah. Next question was considering both, and I guess this will be our last question. I'm just looked at the time, but considering both initial and long-term costs, do modular buildings offer a lifespan that is equal to, superior, or lower than traditionally, based on your experience? I mean, your project's a year old, so it's tough to.
But we do make long-term maintenance studies of our buildings, so we probably have an estimate of its lifetime somewhere. However, I don't have that information. I don't want to mislead you, but if you send me that question by writing, I will ask. The impression I get is that we feel it's similar in terms of quality, but I would need to check with my colleagues before answering that. Maybe I can say before we head out that we have a white paper coming that will have the breakdown of the costs that I was talking about. So if you're curious to see, how much cheaper was it to do doors and windows at the factory versus on site, this whole breakdown will be included in the white paper. It should be published somewhere this fall. So if you follow UTILE on LinkedIn, you will see it pass when we release it, or myself on LinkedIn as well. So if you're curious and you want to see the nitty-gritty details of what I talked about today, we will be releasing that in a couple of months.
Thanks. No, that's great, Maxime. Thank you for your presentation today. It was really timely, actually, because I'm going to promote our next and our last webinar before the fall. So, thanks again for your time. And yeah, as we mentioned to the folks on the call, it's going to be available. The recording will be on our website. There's a blog that Nicole's probably drafting as we speak. Slides, I think, Maxime, you shared those. If not, we'll look to get those from you, and everything will be available on the website. Our next presentation is actually our team. So we completed the project called the Atlantic Offsite Housing Innovation Roadmap. It was the development of an innovative roadmap to build housing in Atlantic Canada using offsite technology. So a lot of what Maxime talked about as barriers to driving down costs to modular construction are things that were identified during this project. It was a year-long project across the 4 provinces of Atlantic Canada. Maxime, I hope you'll be able to attend because it would be interesting to get your feedback on it as well. The report's already available on our website in both English and French, so we'll share those with folks as well. And you can just check us out on LinkedIn, and you can see everything there. So thanks again, Maxime, and we'll see you all for the next presentation in June. Take care.
Yeah, my pleasure. Have a good one, people.